The news arrived in late May of 2025, sending ripples across the nation. President Donald Trump, in one of his clemency actions, decided to commute the federal life sentence of Larry Hoover. Hoover, now 74 years old, co-founded the Chicago gang known as the Gangster Disciples. Reports about the exact date of the announcement varied slightly, pinpointing it to either May 28 or May 29. This act of presidential power altered the trajectory of Hoover's decades-long incarceration under federal authority. The commutation specifically addressed the sentence he received for running a vast criminal enterprise from behind prison walls, a charge that had kept him in federal custody for many years, seemingly for the rest of his natural life. This decision by President Trump was a significant development in a case that has spanned generations and drawn national attention. A commutation is not a pardon. It does not forgive the crime or erase the conviction. Instead, it reduces the sentence being served. For Hoover, this meant his federal life sentence was effectively ended, opening a new, albeit complicated, chapter. The commutation was part of a broader series of clemency actions taken by Trump during this period, affecting various individuals convicted of federal crimes. The implications of this particular decision for Hoover, however, were immediately subject to the complexities of his extensive legal history, a history that began long before his federal troubles. The commutation by President Trump specifically targeted the life sentence Hoover received in 1998. This sentence was for continuing criminal enterprise, conspiracy, extortion, and money laundering, all activities orchestrated while he was already incarcerated. For supporters of Hoover, this was a moment of hope, a potential step towards his eventual release from confinement altogether. They viewed it as an acknowledgement of his age and the long years he had already served. However, the news was met with a mixture of reactions, reflecting the deep divisions surrounding Hoover's legacy and the impact of his organization on communities, particularly in Chicago, where his influence was most profoundly felt. The act of clemency brought Hoover's name back into the national spotlight, reigniting debates about justice, rehabilitation, and the power of presidential pardons and commutations. While the federal sentence was a major component of his imprisonment, it was not the only legal barrier keeping him behind bars. The focus quickly shifted to another, older sentence, one handed down by the state of Illinois decades earlier. This state's sentence remained untouched by the presidential action, casting a long shadow over any immediate prospects of freedom for the aging former gang leader, a stark reminder of the layered justice system he still faced. Despite the significant news of his federal sentence commutation, Larry Hoover is not a free man. He continues to face a formidable state sentence in Illinois. This sentence, a term of 150 to 200 years, was handed down for a murder conviction dating back to 1973. It is crucial to understand that a presidential commutation only applies to federal sentences. It holds no power over state-level convictions or sentences. Therefore, even with the federal life sentence lifted, Hoover remains legally bound to serve out his term in Illinois, a sentence that, for all practical purposes, is also a life sentence given its extraordinary length and his advanced age. The 1973 murder conviction was for the killing of William Pookie Young, who was a 19-year-old drug dealer at the time. This crime occurred in Chicago, and was the original reason for Hoover's lengthy incarceration long before his federal charges came into play. The state of Illinois has its own justice system, separate and distinct from the federal government. This means that any efforts to secure Hoover's release must now navigate the Illinois parole system and potentially seek clemency from the Illinois governor. The commutation by President Trump, while a major event, does not simplify this separate and challenging path that still lies ahead for Hoover and his legal team. The reality of this state sentence significantly tempers any celebrations following the federal commutation. Hoover's supporters understand that the fight for his freedom is far from over. They must now redirect their efforts towards the Illinois authorities, hoping for a favorable outcome in a system that has previously denied him parole. The state sentence represents the initial crime for which he was imprisoned, and the Illinois authorities will have their own criteria and considerations when evaluating his case for any form of release. This often involves looking at the nature of the original crime, his behavior while incarcerated in the state system, and his potential risk to society if released. Consequently, the commutation serves as a pivotal moment, but not a final resolution. It removes one major layer of his imprisonment, but leaves another equally significant one firmly in place. The legal team representing Hoover has acknowledged this reality, expressing gratitude for the federal action, while simultaneously preparing for the continued struggle within the Illinois justice system. The focus shifts from federal appeals and clemency to state parole hearings and potential state-level pardon requests, a familiar terrain for those who have been advocating for his release for many years, a terrain that has so far proven difficult to overcome. Currently, Larry Hoover is incarcerated at the ADX Florence Supermax prison, located in Colorado. This facility is known for housing some of the most dangerous and high-risk inmates in the federal prison system. It is designed for maximum security, with conditions that severely restrict inmate movement, communication, and interaction. Hoover has spent a significant portion of his federal sentence within such high-security environments due to his past leadership of the Gangster Disciples and his conviction for running the gang's operations from prison. The conditions at ADX Florence are notoriously stringent, intended to prevent inmates from exerting influence beyond the prison walls, a direct response to activities like those Hoover was convicted of. Following the commutation of his federal sentence, it is anticipated that Hoover will eventually be moved from ADX Florence. Since he still has an active state sentence to serve in Illinois, the logical next step would be his transfer to a prison facility within the Illinois Department of Corrections. However, the specifics of this transfer, including the timing and the particular institution he might be moved to, have not yet been detailed by officials. Such transfers between federal and state custody can involve bureaucratic processes and logistical arrangements that take time to finalize, leaving his immediate location somewhat in limbo despite the presidential action. The prospect of moving to an Illinois state prison might represent a change in environment, but not necessarily an improvement in his overall confinement status. State supermax facilities or high-security units also maintain strict protocols. For Hoover, the primary significance of such a transfer would be his placement under the direct jurisdiction of the Illinois authorities, who will manage his state sentence and any future parole considerations. His daily life, access to programs, and visitation rights would then be governed by Illinois Department of Corrections policies rather than the Federal Bureau of Prisons, a shift in oversight rather than a path to immediate liberty. The uncertainty surrounding his transfer adds another layer to the complex situation. While President Trump stated Hoover should be released immediately from his federal sentence, the practicalities of his outstanding state obligations mean this is not a straightforward release into society. Federal prison officials are tasked with determining a new release date for the federal sentence itself, which is now a formality given the commutation, but the transfer coordination with Illinois officials is the more pressing next step. Until these arrangements are made and executed, Hoover remains within the federal system, albeit with his federal sentence no longer the primary reason for his continued detention. Larry Hoover's federal troubles culminated in a significant conviction in 1997. He was found guilty in federal court of running a massive criminal enterprise, the Gangster Disciples, directly from his prison cell where he was already serving his state sentence for murder. This conviction exposed the extent of his continued influence and control over the gang's illicit activities, despite being incarcerated. The federal charges were extensive and serious, including engaging in a continuing criminal enterprise, conspiracy to distribute narcotics, extortion, and money laundering. These charges painted a picture of a sophisticated operation that spanned multiple states and generated enormous profits for the gang. The federal trial brought to light how Hoover meticulously managed the Gangster Disciples from behind bars. He used coded messages, visits, and phone calls to direct the gang's drug trafficking operations, enforce discipline, and manage its finances. The prosecution presented evidence showing that the Gangster Disciples, under Hoover's remote leadership, had become one of the most powerful and feared street gangs in the country. In 1998, following this conviction, he was sentenced to life in federal prison. This sentence was intended to ensure that he could no longer exert such influence, effectively aiming to dismantle his control over the organization he co-founded and built into a criminal empire. This federal conviction was a landmark case, highlighting the challenges law enforcement faced in dealing with organized crime leaders who continued their operations even while imprisoned. It underscored the reach and resilience of gangs like the Gangster Disciples. For Hoover, it meant that even if he ever managed to secure parole on his state murder sentence, he would still face the entirety of his natural life in federal custody. This federal life sentence became the dominant feature of his imprisonment for over 2 decades, overshadowing the state sentence in terms of its perceived finality, until President Trump's recent commutation altered this landscape. The authorities had spent years investigating Hoover's activities within the prison system, culminating in the sweeping federal indictment. The case demonstrated that physical incarceration alone was not enough to stop a determined and resourceful leader like Hoover from directing a criminal organization. It led to changes in how high-profile, influential inmates were managed within correctional facilities, with increased scrutiny and restrictions placed on their communications and interactions. The 1997 conviction and subsequent life sentence were, at the time, seen as a decisive blow against both Hoover and the gangster disciples hierarchy, a major victory for federal prosecutors. Section 5. The beginning of a long road, the 1973 murder conviction. Larry Hoover's journey through the criminal justice system began long before his federal entanglements. His initial and foundational period of incarceration stemmed from a state conviction in Illinois in 1973. He was found guilty of ordering the murder of William Pookie Young, a 19-year-old drug dealer. The murder took place on Chicago's South Side, a grim testament to the violent street rivalries of the era. For his role in this crime, Hoover received an exceptionally long sentence of 150 to 200 years in state prison. This sentence effectively ensured that, even in his youth, he was facing the prospect of dying behind bars. This 1973 conviction marked the start of Hoover's continuous presence within the Illinois Department of Corrections. It was during his time serving this state sentence that he solidified his leadership over the Black Gangster Disciple Nation, which later evolved into the Gangster Disciples. The murder of Young was reportedly ordered because he was accused of stealing from the gang, an act of internal discipline that showcased the ruthlessness of the organization even in its earlier days. The state trial and subsequent conviction established Hoover as a dangerous figure in the eyes of Illinois law enforcement and the judiciary, setting the stage for his long and contentious relationship with the prison system. The severity of the 150 to 200-year sentence reflected the gravity of the crime and perhaps the perceived threat Hoover posed even then. Such lengthy sentences were intended to send a strong message and ensure public safety. For decades, this state sentence was the primary legal basis for Hoover's imprisonment. He became eligible for parole at various points, but his applications were consistently denied by the Illinois Prisoner Review Board. The circumstances of the murder, his leadership role in a powerful gang, and his subsequent conduct while incarcerated all played a role in these denials, making his release on the state charge a remote possibility. This original conviction is critical to understanding Hoover's current situation. Even with the recent federal commutation, the 1973 murder sentence remains fully active and legally binding. It is this sentence that now stands as the principal obstacle to his freedom. Any hope for release hinges on the Illinois parole process or a potential grant of clemency from the governor of Illinois. The decades that have passed since the crime have not diminished the legal weight of this initial conviction, which continues to define his status as an incarcerated individual, anchoring him firmly within the Illinois correctional system's jurisdiction. Section 6. Kingpin of the Streets, the Rise of the Gangster Disciples. Under Larry Hoover's strategic leadership, the Gangster Disciples transformed into one of Chicago's most formidable and notorious street gangs. Originating in the late 1960s from the merger of rival groups, Hoover was instrumental in centralizing its structure and expanding its operations. Even after his imprisonment in 1973 for murder, his influence did not wane. Instead, he remarkably continued to direct and grow the gang from within prison walls. The organization became deeply involved in drug trafficking, primarily cocaine and heroin, establishing vast networks that extended far beyond Chicago, reaching into numerous other states and generating substantial illicit revenue for its members. At its zenith, the Gangster Disciples reportedly boasted around 6,000 active members. The gang's criminal activities were estimated to generate approximately $100 million annually, a staggering sum that funded its operations, enriched its leadership, and allowed it to exert significant control over various neighborhoods. Hoover's ability to maintain command and orchestrate complex criminal conspiracies while incarcerated was a testament to his organizational acumen and the loyalty he commanded. He implemented a corporate-like structure within the gang, complete with a board of directors and various leadership roles, which contributed to its efficiency and resilience against law enforcement efforts. The gang's influence extended beyond purely criminal enterprises. In the 1990s, Hoover attempted to rebrand parts of the organization under the guise of community development and political activism, using acronyms like Growth and Development for GD. This move was viewed by authorities as a smokescreen to legitimize the gang's activities and further consolidate its power. Despite these efforts at projecting a more positive image, the gangster disciples remained deeply implicated in violence, intimidation, and the drug trade that plagued many communities. Their operations contributed significantly to the cycles of crime and despair in areas where they held sway. Hoover's leadership was characterized by both strategic thinking and a capacity for ruthlessness. He expanded the gangster disciples' reach to over 24 states, making it a national criminal concern. The federal government's eventual prosecution of Hoover in the 1990s for running this enterprise from prison was a direct response to the scale and sophistication of the organization he had built and maintained for decades. The legacy of the gangster disciples under his command is complex, marked by widespread criminal activity, but also by a level of organization rarely seen in street gangs, making him a figure of enduring notoriety. Section 7. High-profile pleas celebrity efforts for Hoover's freedom. In recent years, the campaign for Larry Hoover's release has gained vocal support from prominent figures in the entertainment industry, most notably the influential rappers Ye, formerly known as Kanye West, and Drake. Their advocacy brought renewed attention to Hoover's lengthy incarceration and the arguments for his clemency. In December 2021, Ye and Drake famously put aside their own reported feud to headline a Free Larry Hoover benefit concert in Los Angeles. This high-profile event was designed to raise awareness about Hoover's case and prison reform issues more broadly, drawing significant media coverage and public discussion. Ye, in particular, has been a consistent advocate for Hoover. He reportedly discussed Hoover's case with then-President Donald Trump during a visit to the White House in 2018. Following the news of Trump's commutation of Hoover's federal sentence in May 2025, Ye publicly expressed his gratitude to the former president. This celebrity involvement has undeniably amplified the calls for Hoover's release, leveraging their massive platforms to reach audiences who might otherwise be unfamiliar with the specifics of his decades-old convictions and his ongoing legal battles, framing it often as a matter of justice reform and second chances. The involvement of such well-known celebrities has injected a different dimension into the public discourse surrounding Hoover. While law enforcement and many victims of gang violence view Hoover as a lifelong criminal leader responsible for immense harm, his celebrity supporters often focus on the length of his sentence, his advanced age, and his claims of having reformed. They argue that he has served enough time and that his continued imprisonment, particularly in supermax conditions, is inhumane. This advocacy has helped to keep his case in the public eye, ensuring that it remains a topic of debate and consideration. However, celebrity advocacy can be a double-edged sword. While it raises awareness, it can also attract criticism from those who believe it oversimplifies complex legal and ethical issues or glorifies a figure with a violent past. For Hoover's legal team and family, the support from figures like Ye and Drake is undoubtedly welcome, as it provides a powerful megaphone for their cause. Their efforts highlight a broader cultural conversation about redemption, the American justice system, and the appropriate length and conditions of punishment, especially for individuals incarcerated for decades under controversial circumstances. Section 8. The Path to Redemption, Claims of Reform and Ongoing Legal Fights. A central argument in the efforts to secure Larry Hoover's release revolves around his purported transformation during his decades of incarceration. His attorneys and supporters contend that he has genuinely reformed, renounced his past gang activities, and dedicated himself to education and positive change while in prison. They point to his statements disavowing gang life and his expressed desire to contribute positively to society should he ever be released. This narrative of redemption is a cornerstone of his legal strategy, particularly in his pleas for parole and clemency, both at the federal and state levels, aiming to persuade authorities that he no longer poses a threat. In a notable attempt to secure a sentencing break in 2022, Hoover himself submitted a statement asserting that he wanted nothing to do with the gangster disciples anymore. He claimed to have formally stepped down from any leadership role and to have disavowed the gang's criminal activities. His legal team, currently the Bonjan Law Group, has consistently emphasized these claims of rehabilitation, portraying him as an elderly man who has paid his debt to society and deserves a chance at freedom. They expressed gratitude for President Trump's decision to commute the federal sentence, viewing it as a validation of these reform efforts, at least in part. Despite these claims, Hoover's path to release has been fraught with setbacks. Prior to the recent federal commutation, his requests for sentence reductions and parole were repeatedly denied. For instance, a federal judge rejected a sentence reduction request in 2021, unconvinced by the arguments of his diminished capacity to lead or his complete severance from gang influence. More recently, in 2024, the Illinois Prisoner Review Board unanimously rejected his application for parole on his state murder sentence, indicating skepticism from state authorities about his proclaimed transformation or suitability for release back into the community. Nevertheless, legal efforts are ongoing, particularly now focusing on his Illinois state sentence. Hoover remains eligible for parole in Illinois, and another hearing is reportedly scheduled for later in 2025. His legal team will undoubtedly present the federal commutation as a significant development, hoping it might sway the Illinois board. The fight for his freedom is a persistent one, characterized by a continuous legal battle against a backdrop of decades-old crimes and the enduring shadow of his former criminal empire, a battle that now shifts its full attention to the state system. Section 9. A divided response, reactions, legacy, and an uncertain future. The news of President Trump's commutation of Larry Hoover's federal sentence elicited a spectrum of strong reactions, highlighting the deep divisions surrounding his figure. Ron Safer, a former U.S. assistant attorney who played a key role in prosecuting Hoover in the 1990s, expressed profound disappointment. Safer emphasized the extensive harm caused by Hoover and the gangster disciples, arguing that the commutation overlooked the devastation wrought by the gang's drug trafficking and violence under Hoover's leadership. This perspective is shared by many in law enforcement and by victims of gang violence, who view Hoover as a symbol of destructive criminality. Conversely, Hoover's family, friends, and supporters celebrated the commutation as a long-awaited step towards justice and his potential release. For them, it represented a glimmer of hope that the 74-year-old who has spent most of his adult life incarcerated might one day regain his freedom. They focus on his claims of reform, his advanced age, and the sheer length of time he has already served. This positive reaction was amplified by celebrity advocates who have championed his cause, seeing the commutation as a victory for their efforts and a move towards what they consider a more merciful justice system. Hoover's cultural impact, particularly within certain segments of society and in hip-hop culture, is undeniable. In the 1990s, he even launched a jail-inspired fashion line called Ghetto Prisoner, and a political action committee named 21st Century Vote, attempting to cultivate a different image. His name and story have been referenced in numerous rap lyrics, such as Rick Ross's 2010 single BMF, Blowing Money Fast, which alluded to Hoover and the Black Mafia family. This cultural presence has contributed to a complex, sometimes mythologized perception of Hoover, distinct from the stark realities presented by prosecutors. Looking ahead, Hoover's future remains highly uncertain. While the federal sentence is commuted, the formidable Illinois state sentence of 150 to 200 years for murder still stands. The timing of his potential transfer from federal custody at ADX Florence to an Illinois state facility is unclear. Federal officials are recalculating his federal release date, while Illinois authorities have yet to detail plans for his reception. The commutation was part of a larger set of clemency actions by Trump in May 2025, which also included pardons for figures like Todd and Julie Chrisley. For Hoover, the next critical juncture will be his upcoming parole hearing in Illinois later in 2025, a hearing that will determine if this new chapter includes any possibility of life outside prison walls.